What was the worst job interview you've had? My first interview ever was at DQ and I accidentally knocked a 90-year-old woman over. I drove 2 hours for the interview. Got there and the interviewer was off sick and hadn't told anyone about me coming in. Got back in my car and drove the 2 hours home. Withdrew my name from consideration. Was invited for an IT helper position when I was 17. Would help fix computers for people at a shoddy PC fix shop. They asked me, "What's the first thing you check if a customer calls and says their screen doesn't turn on?" I said, "Well, you gotta check if they have it plugged into a socket." They laughed and said thank you, that will be it. Then led me to the door and gently pushed me out. At an interview for a tech startup, they asked me, "If you could be any animal, what would you be?" I answered, "Otter. Because fun, active, work well with their hands and cute as frock." They really debated whether or not to hire me because of that answer because, and I quote, "We only hire predators, never prey." And they weren't sure how to quantify an otter, because none of them had ever paid the least bit of attention to any sort of animal documentary or read biology or visited a zoo recently. God, that job sucked hard. The interviewer insisted on knowing why I'd left graduate school. Now, I had left graduate school because my advisor died in a car accident and the whole small department was thrown for a loop and no one seemed to know or care what was going to happen to me or my just started research project. The whole interviewer wouldn't even accept. My advisor died suddenly, and dug into the gory details until I was almost in tears, even intimating that I must have had feelings for my advisor. I couldn't wait to get out of there, and in my haste to leave I knocked some solutions off a cart, which had no business being in his office by the way. On my way out, I'd never been so humiliated in my life. After that, I was sure I'd never get a job in science. 5 interview rounds, with the last interview round being with the CEO, all for an entry-level customer service job. During the last interview, the CEO said you weren't allowed to get sick. And you weren't allowed to leave at the end of the day until all of the work had been done. So even though the job was 8 to 4, the CEO said customer service reps often stayed until 6 p.m. or later. She also asked if I would be comfortable secretly reporting to her about what the customer service team is up to. I declined the job offer and the company harassed me with emails asking why and what they did wrong. Really glad I didn't take the job. Job was for a vibration analysis engineer. I knew how to do the job well. I knew the pay should be around $95K. And they stated $55K. In the interview, when I tried to discuss my point, they said, "Don't worry. There's plenty of overtime." They also mentioned since they weren't involved with many balancings at the moment, I would assist the cleaning crew with a lot of the cleanings. I've never been so uninterested in a job in my life. Not that bad. But I remember Taco Bell asked me what type animal I would be if I could be anything. Like, WTF do you want me to say? I would be a fire ant so I could work efficiently with my closest friends. 16-year-old me said an eagle. Because they're strong and they can fly. Meh. I drove an hour to be interviewed for a computer repair tech job at a rental company. And 3/4 of the way through the interview they told me I was perfect for the position. However, they recently removed the position altogether. They then asked if I'd be willing to repair furniture instead until the position opened again. An agency sent me for an interview and said, the starting salary is $33,000. The interview went fairly well until the interviewer said, "So what sort of salary are you looking for?" So using the info I had from the agency I said, "Well, I think $33,000 is a fair starting point." The interviewer practically threw me out. He started to shout about wasting his time because I expected to be paid a huge salary, and who did I think I was? He was paying $20,000. In a group interview, the interviewer crossed a line through my name on the list he had after I told him what I graduated in. This was within the first 5 minutes of a 40-minute meeting. When he said, "I'll give you extra hours if you bring me smokes every day." Then put his hand on my leg and said his wife gives him passes to have fun. I also got a speeding ticket on the way to the interview. Was not my month. An interviewer told me that he worried I would be sexually harassed if I joined his team. Red flag. I interviewed for a project management position. The interviewer describes the job. Basically, it was pure research and data entry of potential clients, then cold calling them and documenting the results. The job ad mentioned exactly none of this but was an average project management job ad. Else I wouldn't have applied in the first place. I asked what exactly was the project management part, and got told that could, not would, be down the road, maybe 2 to 5 years in. But really only maybe. I thanked them for the interview opportunity. We wrapped things up and I politely left. Showed up looking good in my suit with a ton of knowledge on Capital Partners. It turned out I had researched the wrong company named Capital Partners. I went in to apply for an administrative assistant position and the guy kept asking me questions about liking kids and are my passports up to date. etc. I was so confused. Turns out what he really wanted was a nanny for his 2 young kids to travel with him and his wife back to India. I was so pissed he wasted my time. I noped right the frock out of there. Had a phone interview and the woman kept asking more and more intrusive questions. Kept hinting I'm a total piece of shit who's totally unfit for the job. It was the easiest job description ever, and jumping to conclusions about my life that were completely untrue. For example, I found out that being a freelancer who gets a lot of decently paid work each month is apparently living off my parents. She kept going on and on like that for quite a while before I told her to piss off and hung up. Didn't really need that job too badly, but it was in a different country, so the travel aspect was the main reason. Years later I found out it was a stress interview, which apparently is a thing. Frock those people. I had an interview with EMC back in the day. I don't remember the specifics other than I was really nervous. I had a "we are sorry to inform you" email waiting for me before I finished the 10-minute trip home. I was the only person that hour was able to source for a role and I still got rejected. At an interview to be a county street sweeper, guy asks me if I have a girlfriend. Proceeds to rant for 5 minutes how young people don't get married anymore. Then he asks me what I want to avoid at the job. At the time I had no idea how to answer as I'd never been asked that in an interview before, so I ask him to clarify. To which he just repeats the question, over and over until he gets super angry that I don't know how to answer that, then asks me to leave. To this day, biggest WTF interview I've had. Interviewer. Putting candy bars on the table to open the interview. Have a candy bar. Do you want Hershey's or Snickers? Me. Neither. Thanks. I. Go ahead. Pick one. I don't want any candy now. Thanks. I. Take one. Hershey's or Snickers? Okay. I'll take the Snickers. I. No. I want the Snickers. You take the Hershey's. No. Thank you. I interviewed for what was my dream job, something that I have a ton of experience in and 2 degrees, including one from literally the most prestigious school in my field. They liked me so much on my first few rounds of interviews that they asked me to fly across the country for the final one. So I go through easily the worst travel day of my life, arrive for my interview, and the interviewer takes one look at my resume and says, "I don't know why you came all the way out here. You aren't qualified for this. Suffice to say I will never work there." Had an interview. Went well. I was offering the job on the spot and accepted. The HR manager went to get the needed paperwork, came back 10 minutes later and said, "I must have forgot that we already filled this position. I'm sorry, but we don't have an opening. I could call you if something opens back up." I said no thank you. It was my best interview. Great rapport with the interviewer. Gave me the job on the spot. It for a transfer to QA at Johnson Control. Came in to work the next day to have the offer rescinded. The job was already given to the plant manager's niece and it had only been posted because of company policy. The story is much longer and complicated afterward, but it was the first of several times I had been promoted. Different companies, and then been told, never mind. Edit. Appreciate the replies and awards. Feel like I won Reddit today. Edit. Wow. Johnson Controls is really not well liked. Realized it was a pyramid scheme halfway through the interview. I was already working so didn't accept the job. Video chat interview. Red flag number 1, the interview was with 10 interviewers. I was told it would be one-on-one. Red flag number 2. Towards the end they asked if I had any questions. When I asked, "Do you all enjoy working here?" They all looked at each other nervously for about 20 seconds until someone said, "Sure. I mean, as much as you can enjoy work, I guess." Nope. I told them I couldn't answer their questions. Farted audibly out of stress and thanked them for their time. Had an interview at an office supply store once. Guy told me straight up it was a high-pressure sales quota job. Their prices on computers and peripherals were sit and that's what I'd be selling. Dude straight up said it's a lot of work for low pay. Not a lot of people enjoy working there. And he finished off with the fact that he's been there for 18 years. Practically ran out of that interview screaming. I had an interview where I did so poorly. The interviewer wrote it up and submitted it to the Daily WTF.com. It's too embarrassing to link to. Plus I would prefer to remain anonymous. It was really just a miscommunication. The interviewer presented a hypothetical problem, and I gave him a perfectly reasonable solution to the problem, but he kept coming up with reasons why he wouldn't accept my solutions. And my answers got more and more ridiculous, until they didn't make any sense at all. I was just hoping he would drop it and move on to the next question, but he actually took my answers seriously and made me look like a complete fool. Anyway, I learned some things from that experience. I had a Skype interview with a private practice and the lady interviewing me literally made it sound like a stern military parent. You can never be late. Mind you, the job was an hour away. Even if you have a cold, you can never call in sick. IDK if this was meant for pre or post-COVID. We're a small company, so you won't have much of a work-life balance. PS our pay for all this dedication is only $3 more than the measly pay you're getting now. Just a whole interview of red flags. And the last one was when the lady messaged me immediately after saying I got the job and had to leave my job at maximum 5 days notice. Regardless of me kinda bombing the interview and claiming there were other interviewees in line, I could see why they were having trouble. HRING people TBH. I applied for an internship at a human rights law office. They gave me questions on the spot to debate with them. Like, should people accused of rape remain anonymous until convicted? And, is bribery acceptable if it's for a good cause? It was me versus a panel of 5 senior human rights lawyers for a whole hour, who just ripped me apart from start to finish. Everything I said, they made sound like the dumbest response with their rebuttals. By the end I was a nervous babbling wreck. Did not get the internship, but did appreciate the experience in retrospect. When they got back to me, they told me, your CV, resume, was fantastic, so we were quite disappointed with how poor your interview was. Burn. 2. 1. The recruiter started to fold my CV into a paper plane during the interview. Didn't get the job. 2. Was pawned off unsuspectingly to the CFO of a company 5 minutes into my interview with the CEO. The CFO had no idea what to ask, so he went the, tell me your biggest flaws, way. I was so dejected that I said, you'll have to hire me to find out. Interview ended 5 minutes later. I spent 30 minutes crying at my hubris and stupidity in the parking lot. Got the job. It was my first professional law firm interview. I was so nervous. I had applied for a legal secretary position. The attorney whose name was on the door would be interviewing me, so I was a nervous wreck. When he walked in the room, I stood up, introduced myself and shook his hand. He looked me up and down and said, yeah, you'll do. I turned around and walked out without saying another word. I got invited to a group interview. I thought it meant that a group of people would interview me, which is fairly common. I showed up and there were about 10 other kids there. We all went into a conference room and they interviewed us all at once. They asked a question and everyone took turns answering. They switched up who went first each time, and one kid completely froze when it was his turn, so we all had to sit there in the most uncomfortable silence. She said employees got marked down 1 point if they came in late to work, even in a blizzard. She said it was their responsibility to check the weather the day before and prepare accordingly. Some of their employees commuted from 100 miles away, so they didn't cut anybody any slack. Usually I send a follow-up email saying thanks for the interview, I'm interested in the job, blah blah blah. But I didn't send an email that time. I was recommended by a particular manager to interview for a makeup counter position. It was a really tense, awkward interview with the store manager, and I wasn't really certain why he was so hostile toward me. Turns out he was just trying to figure out if I was in on the other manager's scheme of stealing products and selling them on Craigslist, which I found out about after she was arrested the next week. It was a shock to me because she was a bit of a mentor to me and I had no idea. Not horrible. I will just always remember it. Interviewer. Has a previous employer ever asked you to do anything illegal? Smug look on his face thinking I would be flustered. Me. Yes. They asked me to take a copyrighted image and tweak it so we wouldn't get caught. Interviewer. Wow. What did you do? Me. I said no, and am now trying to determine if you are going to ask me to do something illegal in this prospective job. He spent the next 20 minutes apologizing and swearing he just thought it was a fun interview question. It was my first real job interview. It was for a graphic design position in downtown Dallas for a men's grooming product company. I was so nervous, and when I took a drink from a bottle of water I was shaking so much I spilled some on me. Also, I was very unprepared because my portfolio only contained things I made in high school for a graphic design internship I had and some hand drawings that weren't great. I was about 18/19 of a year old at the time. Needless to say, I did not get the job. First thing out of the interviewer's mouth was, "Here we follow the principles set by L. Ron Hubbard." I just thought, well, guess this one's practice. The interviewer started hitting on me by sitting in the waiting room with 2 other interviewees. The manager conducting the interview recognizes one of them as her friend. While they were greeting each other, I looked at the other interviewee and mentioned her. We have no chance. In the middle of my interview, the manager asked me if my current workplace, that I was trying to leave, was hiring. When I said I didn't know, he asked if I'd be willing to drop off a resume for him anyway. It was for a 6-month unpaid internship at a marketing firm who bought and sold billboard space. The entire interview was basically them quizzing me about industry terms and statistics around non-digital marketing. After only managing to answer about 60% correctly, they told me I didn't have enough knowledge in the field. Like, yeah, that's why I'm interviewing for an unpaid internship. My first interview in my life was for a fast food place and I was way too honest. Why do you want to work here? Mostly for the money. I like the food here too. What do you do on your free time? Video games. Did not get a call back. I never got the interview. Years ago I got a call to schedule an interview for Best Buy. I missed the call, but a nice lady left a voicemail with a phone number and extension to call her back. I called, and a man answered. He started saying how I wasn't allowed to call that number and told me I wasn't allowed to call them anymore and to instead wait for them to call me again. I decided if that's what the employees were like, then I should look elsewhere. When I arrived there, they make me go into a room. In the room were already seated in a big table 7 other people. Then the interviewer enters, and start asking questions. To each person, one by one. Basically he was interviewing 8 persons at the same time. The icing on the cake was that one of the other guys was one of my college classmates. So uncomfortable. IDK if it was the worst. But I remember I had an interview where after we were done, as the interviewer was walking me to the exit, because it was a big building, I realized as I was about to leave that I forgot my phone upstairs, so we had to make that long awkward trip back to get it. She was nice about it, but in my head I thought to myself, yeah, I'm not getting this job. Maybe not the worst, but one that stands out. I was the interviewer, hiring for a position working with individuals with mental and/or physical disabilities. The person I was interviewing used the word retarded multiple times. I pointed it out after the second use, stating, this is a position working with people with disabilities. That is a word that is not tolerated in this environment. They shrugged it off. Maybe 2 minutes later, dropped it again. I stood up, thanked them for their interest, handed them back their resume, and told them I could already tell it wouldn't be a good fit and didn't want to waste their time, and walked them to the door. I reached out to shake hands with the interviewer, having not noticed that she didn't have a right hand. Today for accounts leader position, my mind completely blanked. 4 years worth of experience in accountancy. Just bury me in the corner, thanks. Went to that small company specializing in furnitures. Got some task to complete in AutoCAD as a test. First thing I've noticed that the position I applied for wasn't the same as in description. Second thing is the boss shouting at everybody and swearing while I've been doing that test. And at the end he invited me to his office and frocked off for 40 minutes where I had to wait, and it all ended up with weird conversation about his expectations and me explaining to him that it wasn't mentioned in the job description. Jesus Christ, what a cringe day that was. Interviewed for a job at GameStop like 7 or 8 years ago. The manager was doing the interview and she spent the entire time just talking the other people that came in for interviews and her own employees. I realized right then it was going to be a super toxic environment, but I needed the money, so I just smiled and nodded. Only ended up working there for a couple months in the end because I found a different job elsewhere. But I was indeed correct about my hunch. Everyone was so two-faced at that GameStop. They'd act like your friend when you were working the same shift as them, but then turn around and blast you every chance they got when you weren't around. I'm 18 and living at my parents'. I've only ever had labor jobs at the point. No real work experience. I end up getting an interview at a company that manufactures chainsaws as an assembler. The pay and hours were great for an 18-year-old and I was pretty excited. My pops gave me a ride to the interview for some reason. Straight up walked into the building with me, and when the owner came out he shook my hand and told me to follow him into his office. My frocking dad followed. The whole interview was me, my dad and him. My dad even answered some questions like I was 8 years old. I didn't get hired. I was in the room with the VP and an HR person. The person who would be my boss, if I got the position, was running a few minutes late. We were making small talk and one of them brings up a recent football game. I told them honestly that I didn't keep up with football. I'm saying this as the other guy comes in. I turn around and he's basically just missing the face paint, head to toe in Brown's apparel, which seems strange for a place of business. Lost him before he even sat down. He basically frocked with his phone the whole time and embarrassed the other 2 people in the room. For what it's worth, if I did like football I wouldn't root for the frocking Browns. I was asked which Harry Potter character I'm most similar to, but I haven't read Harry Potter. And this obviously had nothing to do with the position I was applying for. I didn't get the job, probably because I was outed as not being part of the HP fan club. I was left in a doctor office waiting room for 1 hour. They forgot about me. I was offered the job, didn't take it. Constant repetition of the phrase, I need a rockstar project manager. No. Being a project manager is putting out fires and stressing over people's bullshit and knowing how to juggle everything. You don't want a cocky, Rockstar. You want someone who can keep their shit together under pressure. Also, don't tell me it'll be 60 to 70 hours a week and offer me $45. plus some random commission structure. This was potentially terrible. I applied for 2 different jobs at the local university. I got called in for an interview, but I wasn't quite certain which position the interview was for. Fortunately, I was vague enough and asked the right questions within the first few minutes, that I was able to figure out which one it was. The whole interview was awful, but it ended with the following exchange. Interviewer: okay. So, before this guy comes in, I just want you to know, he hates women. Me, a woman. Interviewer: it's okay though. He has a good excuse. Me, I'd love to hear it. Interviewer: you know the Prime Minister of Iceland? Me, yeah. Wasn't she the first lesbian Prime Minister ever or something? Interviewer: she's also this guy's ex-wife. Interview at a stationery shop. I walked in and asked for the manager. They asked me to wait and told me I could sit on this desk chair that was on a plinth at the front of the shop. I chose to just stand because I'm so clumsy that I'd probably roll the chair off the plinth and go flying. The reason they gave for me not getting the job was that I didn't sit in the chair, and that showed that I lacked the confidence they wanted. I've never had a disastrous interview, but I have had awful jobs and bad bosses. It can't be said enough. Trust your gut. Anytime I didn't get a good feeling from the interview and walking through the job site office, it turned out to be a crappy place to work. Toxic owners and managers spread the ick around to everyone there. For an incredibly demeaning and city job in adult education, as I discovered later, I was once grilled by a panel of no less than 6 people. I was a brand new college grad, and clueless as to how both civilian job and the education field actually worked. They questioned me for almost an hour, and I was sweating through it. They talked up the position like it was something glorious. Come to find out, after about a month on the job, I could have went in there and sit on the conference table, and they'd have hired me. They were desperate for anyone with an education degree, as they lost people so rapidly when they found out how shitty it was. I was responding to a waitressing ad with open interviews in a new city. I dressed professionally, but when I showed up there were a line of women there in club attire. I was quite confused. Anyway, I signed in, and when my name was called I was brought through the kitchen into an office, so I didn't see the restaurant part. We get to talking, and 25 minutes in, I realized that this is a strip club. How did I realize? They gave me a tour. The minute I saw the poles my heart dropped. I excused myself to the restroom and booked it. Nothing against strippers or sex workers. Live your best life, but the pole is not for me. Maybe more weird, funny than worst. But stripper job. Interviewed with the club owner in his tiny, private office. Asked me a bunch of questions. Stuff like the hardest problem I've ever solved, as if that was going to be relevant to taking my clothes off for money. At the end of the interview, the boss said, "You look like you have lovely breasts. May I see one?" I was both annoyed and amused. "One. May I see one?" It was such an oddly phrased question. I said, "If you give me the job, you can see them both." And I got the job. Worked there for all of a week. Like 15 years ago, at an interview to waitress at a hip place in Boston, the interviewer's boss came in and fired him on the spot. I went and interviewed at a place doing the same job I do now. When the time came, the manager I was interviewing with asks me, "So, what would you like to be making here?" And I told him the amount, which was the same I was making at my previous job, and he said, "Oh, I don't make that much. Thanks for wasting my time." I got 2 things from this job interview. 1. Never go on an interview that doesn't have a pay scale posted on the job listing. 2. I'm an industrial electrician. I'm not showing up in dress shoes and slacks to interview for a job. Almost ruined my shoes walking around this shithole. Interviewing a guy for an IT position. Every question I'd ask him, he'd just point to his stack of certificates. Me. What would you do to troubleshoot a printer that's not printing? Him. I have my A+ cert. I'm qualified to handle that. Me. Okay. But what steps would you take to troubleshoot the problem? Him. Don't you see my name on this certificate? Me. Moving on. How would you handle a difficult customer? Him. I have my A+ cert. I'm qualified to fix their problems. The cert ain't enough, buddy. It just proves you're good at passing a multiple choice test. You failed the short answer version. A little company called Play It Again Computers, that was pushing used computer hardware. That in its own right wasn't the problem. They were pulling components and selling them as new to unsuspecting customers. I got in a shouting match with the owner of that store halfway through the interview. Although they were paying minimum wage for computer technician work, I did not get that job. What's your religion? Excuse me? What's your religion? Well, I was raised Catholic. Pause. We don't have any open positions. I was the interviewer. The person I was interviewing was wearing a pretty heavy pea coat. It was cold outside. Normal inside. He kept it on during the interview. He started sweating. 10 minutes into a 20-minute interview and his head is basically drenched. We offered to take his coat and asked if he wanted to take it off, but he declined. It was extremely awkward. Poor guy. I sweat easily and know firsthand that when it starts and you get self-conscious about it, it just gets worse and worse. It was a super casual interview too. He could have said, "Can we pause for a minute so I can get this sweating under control?" And it would have been 100% fine. It was an IT position 6 hours away. They insisted on an in-person interview. Took the day off of work and drove to interview. Within 5 minutes, the interviewer stated they had no positions available and just wanted to meet me. Frock that guy and frock that company. Drove back in a fuming rage. I was just out of high school. Interviewing to drive an auto parts store truck around from shop to shop. Interview went well. As I backed out of parking lot, I rolled over a curb and into a sign. No one saw. When I put my car into first gear, I had to gun it to get it back over the curb. Everyone heard that part of it. Didn't get the job. Edit. Word. Unarmed security job made me fill a magazine-sized application. 3 drug tests. Passed all. Lie detector. And pay $80 out of my pocket to be fingerprinted at the police station. Didn't get the job. I drove 3 hours for a job interview in a city I planned to move to. The girl looked at me, made me wait in the lobby, took me on a quick tour of the facility, brought me back to an office and asked me if I had any questions, then proceeded to not answer any of my questions and walked me to the front door. I drove 3 frocking hours.